welcome to the session titled Safer Materials in Green Chemistry We Trust. I'm Sean Hunter, Product Sustainability Leader for the Performance Building Solutions business within the Specialty Products Division of DuPont. And it's my honor today to be moderating this session, which focuses on a topic that I think is just so important. In fact, it's a topic that without which life itself would not exist. And so from that perspective, this topic fits very well in our human by nature theme for the conference this year, which, of course, that topic is chemistry. So if you're attending this session, I'm assuming you're interested in safer chemistry, safer materials, safer products. And so if that's the case, you are in luck, because we have undoubtedly the top two guys on the planet to talk to you about green chemistry and really help us understand how green chemistry can help us design a sustainable future. So our two world-renowned speakers are both chemists. They've spent their careers inventing chemistry, practicing chemistry, teaching chemistry, managing chemistry, each in their own way, but with a common vision. And that vision is a vision for change, a vision that the application of chemistry in the right way is essential for helping us to get to the sustainable future that we're all working toward. Here at Greenbuild, we are surrounded by architects and designers who have this vision that we can really design a sustainable tomorrow when our intentions meet our decisions. And I think John and Paul both share that belief, and in fact, we can think of them as molecular architects and designers. So with that, let's bring up who are often referred to as the founding fathers of green chemistry, Paul Anastas and John Warner. So Paul Anastas is the Heinz Chair of Chemistry for the Environment at Yale University. He has appointments in 5 departments, including the School of Public Health and the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. He is the founding director of the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale. He's co-founded multiple companies, helped to co-found the Green Chemistry Institute, and notably, he served in the administrations of the past 3 US presidents, serving in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Clinton and Bush administrations, and serving as the assistant administrator and chief scientist at the EPA in the Obama administration. Paul has a fun fact that he has actually published a scientific paper in a technical journal that contains a poem.
That he wrote.
And we're not going to ask him to recite it.
After.
John Warner is the president and chief technology officer of the Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry, which he helped found in 2007. And Warner Babcock describes itself as a green chemistry innovation factory. Before that, he spent a decade in industry, working as a research chemist at the Polaroid Corporation, spent another decade in academia, working at UMass Boston and Lowell as a full tenured professor. He's also founded many companies and holds 168 patents. And notably, he has won awards where he's been recognized as the country's top industrial chemist, the country's top academic, and the country's top inventor. In terms of fun fact, John has actually given a scientific lecture using a piano. Together, these two have developed the 12 principles of green chemistry. We're going to hear more about that. They literally wrote the book on green chemistry, and in doing so, really helped to found a new field that continues today to change the way that chemistry is practiced. So Paul, John, how are you guys doing?
Very well.
Fantastic.
We are so excited to have you guys here. For our session today, I'll be asking Paul and John a few questions on a number of different topics that I think are relevant to our overall green building discussion. What I can guarantee is that we do not have nearly enough time to actually get through everything we might want to. But what I'm hoping is that you leave with a little understanding for what green chemistry is trying to achieve, and that maybe your interest is piqued to learn a little bit more. So without further ado, the topic of the field of green chemistry. Guys, tell us about green chemistry. What is it? What can it do for us?
So, first of all, thanks for having us. This is always fun to talk about the subject that you care about most. Green chemistry recognizes that we've got 200 years of just miraculous innovation. New materials that have transformed health, the way that we use grow and use food, the way that we communicate, the way that we travel, just all aspects. And that we've been just astoundingly innovative. Except that we weren't so good at designing it so that it didn't cause unintended consequences. That there's been all of this history about things that weren't intended. And green chemistry basically is, in a nutshell, saying we can do better. We can do better because we now have the knowledge that not just doing things a little bit more efficiently or not doing things to clean up a little waste, we know how to do things across the life cycle so that our products, our processes, our systems, our materials are going to be less hazardous by design. And design is the absolute key word because it's not about doing things 10% less bad. It's about how do you actually invent, innovate, create. So it's not about what you don't do, it's what you can do. And when you start at the molecular level, the influence that you can have across our society and our economy is immense. And green chemistry has touched every part of that society and that economy, all industrial sectors. And the reason that I'm so excited about being here is because there is so much potential in the building area writ large for green chemistry. We've only scratched the surface.
The way that I try to explain green chemistry is I have a 6-year-old daughter, and like all fathers of 6-year-old daughters, she's an amazing, wonderful thing. And she can communicate perfectly with anybody in this room. She can carry out complete conversations. I'm amazed at her vocabulary. I'm amazed at the way she structures her thoughts. She completely communicates. She's beginning to write. She's beginning to learn to read. In a few years, she's going to have a class in grammar. She's going to learn about nouns. She's going to learn about verbs. She's going to learn about sentence structure. Now, ironically, she's going to be using nouns and verbs and sentence structure to learn about it. So you might say to yourself, well, why bother? She's completely articulate. She knows how to read. She knows how to write. Why in the world do we need to have a class in nouns and verbs? Unfortunately for her, she's really just mimicking her parents and the people around her. When she learns sentence structure, when she learns nouns and verbs, she's going to embrace language at a much higher level. She's going to start communicating not only with others, but with herself in how she structures her thoughts and everything like that. Okay, so you get a point that it's really good for her to take that class in grammar. Now, I would argue that we in chemistry are the 6-year-old kids. We don't want to die in the lab. We choose to wake up in the morning and say, I don't want to expose myself to dangerous things. The really smart companies figured out if you kill your customers, that's bad for sales. And so we have, since the beginning of time, recognized we don't want to hurt ourselves, we don't want to hurt the planet. But much like my daughter speaking English, there's no rules. There's no sentence structure. There's no codification of how does one approach this using the tools of science in a way that we have sentence structure in life. So the 12 principles of green chemistry are that enabling knowledge that allows someone to try to survive in a confusing world, to actually design a successful future world. And so that's the nuance. So of course, people don't want to most people don't want to poison the world and the earth, and they want to do the right thing. But if you look at the curriculum of chemistry historically, there's no class that teaches chemists how to do it. And so it's not about doing less bad, it's about inventing, imagining, and designing things that are awesome for performance, awesome for cost, but don't have these unintended consequences. But you can't do it just because you want to. It is a skill set that needs to be taught and learned and mastered.
So you guys basically wrote the book to define what that skill set looks like, right? And you're essentially telling chemists, hey, you can do things differently. This is how you can do things. So we're celebrating many things at Greenville this week. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the book that has set this framework that chemists can really use, I think, as a source of innovation. So from an innovation perspective, do you have examples of green chemistry in action?
Yeah. So the thing is there's a lot of people doing green chemistry. In 1996, the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award began in the U.S. government. The administration, the EPA, give 5 awards every year for, I say not to individuals, not to companies, but to technologies that have pushed the ball further. Now remember, the enemy of the excellent is the perfect. We always have more things that we can do to improve. But 1996 is now 2018. That's 22 years of 5 awards every year. So you log on to the EPA website or the American Chemical Side website, Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award, you will get 120 case studies of companies that have looked at problems and solved the problems, and they were pretty well documented as a whole set of case studies. So, illustrating, saying the things that I do, that's just because they're the things that I've done, but make no mistake about it, there's a lot of this going on. So the Warner Babcock Institute in 2007, I left academia to focus solely on invention. So I call it an invention factory, and Joe Pont is in the audience. He's the CEO of the Warner Babcock Institute. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've invented an asphalt additive that allows you to use nearly 100% recycled material and reduce the operating temperature. We have, and that's on sale and marketed, we have a wood composite adhesive that is formaldehyde-free, that is MDI isocyanate-free, that is being used in pilot scale in several ton quantities. We have a solar energy technology that harvests ambient light in low room light to recharge anything on the Internet of Things that has batteries. Now, all of those things, the key is there is what a technology does, and there's what a technology is. And as Paul points out, it's not nearly enough to say, my technology does blank. At the end of the day, the people manufacturing, the people that are dealing with end of life, and everyone in between cares also about what the technology is. And so it's kind of, you got to do both. And so each one of these has woven in them things that less carcinogenic, less energy use, more biodegradable, more renewable. And so the 12 principles of green chemistry are designed to focus on what they are. But the only way this is going to work is if it has superior performance and superior cost. Okay, so this isn't saying, here's 22 milligrams of unobtainium on a microscope slide, industry should now use it. Okay, that's not the point. The point is that part of the inventor's responsibility is to have these environmental benefits, but not sacrifice performance and not sacrifice cost.
And I'd just add one thing to that, because I agree with everything that John said. And I'd just add that it gets so exciting because when you can envision what's possible, that all of a sudden we realize that all of these goals are about higher performance, higher functionality, never compromise in functionality. And so you start thinking about the visions of what's possible. I mean, there are journals, scientific journals from the Royal Society of Chemistry, the American Chemical Society, filled to the brim with innovations. And you start imagining and seeing demonstrated things like self-aware materials, self-healing materials. These types of things are there. But it's also really important to not think about green chemistry as, just something in the future. That's something that's going to happen, but that's not something that's real now. It is absolutely real now. I was just up in the exhibition hall, and I'm lucky enough to be a little bit associated with a wonderful company called Phase Change Energy, and they have phase change materials, but they also continued along that innovation trajectory where you now have bio-based phase change materials that are, again, higher performance, higher functionality. And so when you see these types of things that are brought to scale, that are able to be built into projects today, that's what's every bit as exciting as what's over the horizon.
So when you've made green chemistry happen. You've designed molecules as these molecular architects. When you're doing that, how do you actually use green chemistry to find something that's safer?
Okay. So the most important thing is for everyone, green chemistry is a personal thing, and how you approach it is different. Just to say to an author, how do you write a book? If you ask 10 authors, you would get 10 different answers. If you asked a composer, how do you compose music? You get 10. So there's a certain personal thing. So for me, I'm not in my answer not saying this is the way you must do it. But the way that I look at it is when you're imagining all invention starts with science fiction. Think about it. When you imagine something that you want to do in science that today's science can't do, that by definition is science fiction. And so when we're trying to solve problems in science and we're imagining doing something that current state of science can't do, we must embrace the fact that we're writing science fiction and that we're using a different part of our brain. It's not a technical part, it's a creative, imaginative part. So as you plot out what you want to do, then my suggestion, and what I do, is I look at the 12 principles and I say, okay, how is this addressing principle number 1? Can I, with things that I know about today, do it? And if there's an obvious thing that someone has invented that someone's published in a journal or got an award for, I can search the literature, I am going to use the best technology that's available. If there's something that isn't quite there, but I think I could invent it, use a better solvent or use a better starting material, I'm going to do that. At the next moment, if I come up and say, man, right now, for principle number 3, I can't really do any better. Someday I have to do better. I put that in a parking lot and I say, someday I need to work on this. But because the clock is ticking and I have to get going and solve this problem, I move on to the next principle and the next principle, and I make sure that I'm doing everything the best that I can, recognizing that I can't work on all 12 principles at the same time. I need to get things out, but doing the best that I can and consciously acknowledging it and then parking the things that I want to work on in the future to invent better. I don't know if you have a different way of looking.
No, I think John captured so much of it. But when you start thinking about the materials and, quite frankly, the way that we generate, store, and transport our energy, you start looking at the intrinsic properties and the inherent nature of these materials. So is it able to get into our body? There are basic properties that allow a chemical to get into your body, or not. Allow it to get into the biosphere, or not. Allow it to get up into the atmosphere, or not. These are the same chemical properties that chemists have manipulated for 200 years. But they've done it for other reasons, for function and performance. So now it's just taking the exact same skill set with an additional perspective and designing so that you not only get the function and performance, but also you avoid the unintended consequences. And the clean little secret is that you can design for additional functionality at the same time. So by thinking at that level, you're able to design. I had a book years ago called Benign by Design. And there's ways to think in these terms. Now, the one thing that I'm guessing we're probably going to chat a little bit more about is this is not just about chemists. Please don't take home the message that, well, that's fine for you chemists, but I'm not a chemist, so what the heck relevance is to me? This is directly relevant to you. Why? Because if you're using these materials, if you're purchasing these materials, if you're the person in charge of process specification, purchasing specification and procurement, you're the person that's communicating about what materials should be used. Anywhere along the enterprise, you can, demand, use, enable green chemistry materials to make fundamentally more sustainable green buildings.
There's a critical point there. So oftentimes people talk about the 3 pillars: performance, cost, and sustainability. The interesting thing is if you are a purchaser or a specifier and you specify a sustainability attribute, that goes in the performance bucket, not the sustainability bucket. If your customer is asking for something, it's kind of silly for the supplier to be saying, oh, that's a sustainability aspect. The moment the customer asks for it, it's a performance attribute. And we handle performance attributes in a different way in R&D than the sustainability ones, unfortunately. But when the world is demanding everything be sustainable, the sustainability pillar goes away and it just becomes performance. And we're all better off the more that happens.
So you have this set of principles. They're essentially a framework for design, and design is a signal of intention. You're saying you need to ask these questions in the right way, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a clear a message that kind of resonates with what we think about in green building. In terms of intention, one of the popular topics here is around avoiding regrettable substitutions and making sure we're doing alternatives assessment and thinking through that. So where do you see that practice today? Do you see folks applying applying green chemistry to avoid the regrettable substitutions?
So an alternatives assessment, the word alternative implies that it exists. All right, and I think there is a moral and ethical responsibility that everyone should do an alternatives assessment to find the best technology available. However, in 2018, there are a lot of things that someone hasn't invented a better technology yet. And so the alternatives assessment identifies unmet needs. And so the research community needs to be communicated with the research community. So the alternatives assessment isn't really green chemistry, it is the triggering of the need for green chemistry when the alternatives assessment is unsuccessful. Which, as I said, the majority of times it would be. It's not an either or. It's the process by which you have, like I said, a moral and ethical responsibility to get the best material possible. But sadly, right now, we've got a lot of inventions to take care of.
So I completely agree with John on that. The only thing I come back to on the point that you were making about things being intentional is I was speaking to a large company in the Northwest, and the leadership of the company was saying, sustainability is so complicated. When somebody asks you, how do you build sustainability into your programs, your business plans, and your decisions, how do you do that? And I said, I consider it. And that sounds like such a soft answer, doesn't it? I consider it. No, it's not a soft answer. When you say that you consider something, it means that you value it enough to build it into every decision that you're making, thoughtfully. That you're considering it, that you don't dismiss it, you don't blame it on other types of the supply chain or customer demand. I consider it in all aspects of all I do. That is an extremely powerful statement.
Yeah.
So let's pick up that thread of communication and turn to a topic that I think is very relevant and meaningful to folks in the room, which is transparency. It's a major discussion in the overall green building movement and tied closely to the material health discussion. And transparency, I think, can become sort of a balance between the information that you're wanting to provide to the stakeholders who are asking for it, and then your ability is to essentially protect the invention that you spent so much hard work in developing. And I think finding that balance is a journey we're still on. So my question is, when you're developing a green chemistry new solution, something brand new to the world, how comfortable are you with sharing information? What's the right level of information that you need to share with folks who can make decisions?
You want to start? Or?
Sure, I'll start. I wish we were in a world where we could be fully transparent, but I've got two different approaches. Most of the time, secrets, trade secrets, or what they are, aren't really necessary. Most of the time, it's kind of silly. There's no reason why. With a GC mass spec and an HPLC, you can reverse engineer any product. Any good chemist can do it. So pretending that, we have to maintain secrets, more often than not is kind of laughable. I am sure there are some cases where there's a legitimate concern for that, but by far the tiny minority. But the other the issue I have with the concept of transparency, which I endorse and support, is just because you can see all the parts of something, it doesn't mean you can draw conclusions about the impacts of that something. To me, if you give me 3 molecules, I can combine them in different orders, heat them in different ways, put them in different sequences to make nearly an infinite number of products. I can make some of those products can be very dangerous. Some of those products can be very safe, and they have exactly the same 3 ingredients. And so if all we're saying is, tell me what the ingredients were, that doesn't say that a product is safe or dangerous. It gives you some information. It's not useless. But there's so many synergistic effects, there's so many other complicated things that happen. I have several pharmaceutical compounds that are in various stages of development. Most of them are binary systems. You give one of the molecules, nothing happens. You give the other molecule, nothing happens. You put them together, and physiological systems respond in a different way to cure diseases. Well, gee whiz, if that happens when it's doing something good, we got to assume sometimes it's going to happen when it does something bad. It's impossible to test all of the individual things. It is exponentially impossible to anticipate all the synergies. So just looking at individual ingredient lists and saying, we are transparent, the world is safe, we gotta be careful what we say when we say that.
With the exceptions that John outlined, there are a very narrow band of things that, yes, you may want to have as genuine trade secrets, et cetera, et cetera. The exception of that, transparency should be the fundamental bar for license to operate. You should have transparency. But John's right, transparency is not enough. Lists are not enough. We have just been through a decade or more of a revolution in sensor technology, sensor and detection technology, so that we now have the ability to have real-time awareness of what's there, real-time awareness in our materials, in our environment. To say that we are going to rely on lists of these are the ingredients in all of our products is, so last century.
So can you build on that a little bit? Because you're saying that transparency is a start maybe for what folks should know towards managing health and material health sorts of things. But beyond that, what do you see, what information do folks need to more completely see that picture?
So John outlined some of the complicating issues about whether or not a product, for instance, a product formulation or a material is going to, it's not just going to be the individual components. The individual components can interact in a wide variety of ways to impact human health of the environment. So having that kind of context is something that you'd also need in order to make good decisions, in order to know what it is you should be demanding. I genuinely believe it's about the character, the nature, the attributes of the materials that we use in, we'll talk about building, but really in all aspects of our economy.
Yeah. So my aspirational goal in the future is not to look at the ingredients in the molecules, but to have some consensus of what endpoints we're worried about and what assays we want to use. And if we spent all the time that we spend making red lists and we debate for years, let's put this molecule on the list, let's take this molecule off the list, put this molecule on, and we debate this over and over again. If we had a debate, what are the endpoints that we most care about, and what are the best assays to assess those endpoints? And then transparency was, how did your product perform against those assays? And the transparency being not what's in it, but what did they do on the cancer test? What did they do on the endocrine test? Now, today, science, we can't do that. This is science fiction. We've got to design and think really through. There's a lot of problems with that simple statement. But what society needs is that. You know, if you're looking at a bunch of runners and you want to know who is going to run the fastest, their name, their address, and what clothes they're wearing is less relevant than have them run on the track and see who finishes first. So that performance information, transparency of that. But right now, we don't have the resources in society to do the testing. So we've got a lot of things that have to happen. We could do computational testing. We could do genotox screens. If you get 10 people together, we're going to argue over what those screens are. That is an important debate. We need that discussion.
It's not just low-hanging fruit. There's fruit right there on the ground that you better pick it up before it rots. So what's an example of this? Every one of us, everyone in this room has synthetic substances that have been discovered since 1940 building up in your body. Every one of you. Thank you.
That's an important point.
Important point.
Stirring.
So every one of us has these substances building up in our body. I am not sitting here saying, oh no, we're all gonna die, we're all gonna die, and that's not my point. Because quite frankly, we don't know the risk from the interactions of these substances in our body at the levels that they are present. My point is that, one, none of you signed a waiver saying, yeah, I don't mind if I have these substances building up in my body. But two, we know how to design things so that they don't build up in your body. We know how to design things so that they don't accumulate in the oceans. We know how to design things so that they degrade in the environment and they don't, persist. I say to my colleagues who I love dearly at the university that it's okay if you want to strive for immortality, but don't impart that on the materials that you make. And so we have so many opportunities.
And there's a lot of knowledge. So another one of my little stories I'd like to tell is that long time ago, 250 years ago, the world started to think about molecules and atoms. And somewhere in the middle of the 1700s, Lavoisier started what we call modern chemistry, where Lavoisier looked at molecular structure and atoms and started to explain the world around them. And people started to call themselves chemists and started to explain, why does this happen? What's happening here? What is the structure of this? And there was this thing of creating knowledge for the sake of knowledge and understanding. That was the first century of chemistry. 100 years later, William Perkin was playing with some coal. He saw a pink liquid come out. He said, gee, that sticks to a fabric. I can sell it. And industrial chemistry was born. And all of a sudden, the field of chemistry broke into two groups. One tribe continued to do the knowledge and understand, and one tribe said, I can make stuff, I can sell stuff. And the Industrial Revolution happened, and we started curing sick people. We started inventing agricultural agents and textiles, and the world and the human condition was improved substantially, but there was an economy to support that. And so this group had a whole different form of economic support than the group that was studying things. And at some point, they stopped speaking the same language. And so when in the 60s, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, and people started to look at mechanisms of environmental damage, toxicological mechanisms, these people, they didn't have classes in textbooks or anything that taught them anything about that. And so now in the 3rd century of chemistry, I'd like to think green chemistry is pulling those tribes back together, because there are people who understand mechanisms of harm, and the people who are designing things need to learn and have a conduit to their knowledge. So green chemistry is enjoying the benefits. Think of every person, these famous scientists who spend their life documenting how molecules are hurting the environment. If that knowledge does not go to an inventor of a next generation material, they're just making people sad. And so if that becomes the textbook of next generation materials, it changes everything. So it's not that the knowledge isn't there. It's not that it's being developed. It needs to be put into design, not just characterization, but be part of what we mean by good design.
So think about what John has just said. So the only reason to deeply understand a problem is to inform and empower its solution.
If you think about it, the field of chemistry, someone who defines themselves as a chemist, if while they're being trained, even in K through 12, and then in undergraduate, and then in graduate, if these issues of what makes a molecule toxic, what makes a molecule have impact on the environment, if it's not part of their curriculum when they become a chemist, then it's never part of who they are. So when they go to industry, and industry says, gee whiz, we've got these regulations, we've got these things that we can't use. They say, well, wait a minute, if this was really important, certainly that would have been part of my curriculum. And so we have the very practitioners confused over what was going on here. If this is so important, why isn't it part of who I am? You go into most academic labs. Here we are terrified of bisphenol A. We're terrified of all these phthalates. If you go to your traditional chemistry lab, you will find 18-year-old kids, poorly protected, with 50 grams of bisphenol A being measured on a scale and pouring out phthalates. And as chemists, we just play with these things. And then you go and find out, oh my God, milligram quantities in a product are dangerous. Those chemists are kind of laughing, saying, I don't understand. It's not part of the culture of chemistry yet. And so how can we invent things that don't do this if it's not part of who we are?
We've been talking a long time, and I just want to add one more sentence. We've talked a lot about the chemists and the chemistry, and it's coming back to, it's not just about the chemists. It's not just about the chemistry. It's what questions can you ask? What things can you demand? What specifications can you put in your materials? That's a really important
and
point.
so that if you are demanding from the chemists things, then chemists will change their curriculum to enable them to deliver. But if you're not asking.
So you're painting a vision of change. Green chemistry has been around the text for 20 years, the field stuff a little bit longer. Where do you see the field going? What are the big problems that green chemistry needs to be tackling right now?
So this audience doesn't need to be told that we're on an unsustainable trajectory. When we take a look at our infrastructure, our water, our biodiversity loss. So how you look at the ways that we've been approaching those great grand challenges comes back to this idea of doing the right things wrong. Sure, you can produce more food, but are you going to do it in a way that is going to not toxify our soil and result in eutrophication of our oceans? Are you going to address energy efficiency in ways that are not going to be using toxic feedstocks and have neurotoxins in the landfill? And you can go on and on. So what is the future? Applying the design principles to these great grand challenges and recognizing that these are systems issues. These are systems challenges, and how you intervene in that system at a fundamental level. So rather than, as we always talk about, there's cascading nonlinear problems, and you burn fossil fuels and you increase CO2 and the heat and the conflict, and how do you design cascading nonlinear solutions? How do you, by understanding the inherent nature of our materials and our energy, how do you create solutions that are larger than that discrete intervention? That requires systems thinking, understanding the causal loops and where and how to intervene.
And that's the beauty of biomimicry. Of course, people in this room are probably familiar with the concept of biomimicry as a product level design. But in a way, green chemistry can be seen in a way as molecular level biomimicry. If there is something happening in nature, by definition, it's just part of a complex system, and that it has evolved in that complex system. So whenever we imagine wanting to invent a paint, or invent an adhesive, or invent a plasticizer, or invent a whatever, if we look and ask how nature does it at a molecular level, and look at the dynamic equilibria that is constructing that adhesive or whatever it is, and then what biochemical process is degrading that and how it fits into this complex thing. Once we start understanding those molecular interactions and saying, how can I learn from that and put that into my product, and start looking at our products as biological complex systems, we can start accomplishing things, and it can be done.
So we can apply the principles, we can embrace green chemistry, we can learn from nature, we can ask the right questions. Got a lot of folks who want to make some change happen. How long do we have to wait until all chemistry is green chemistry?
Ooh.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hold on. Yeah. No, they'll never get there. And I don't mean that cynically, but we're always going to learn more new mechanisms of harm. We're always going to discover things we didn't know before. And so this is a continuous journey forever to always be improving our products and being sensitive to the nuances of how they can have implications that impact human health and the environment. And so there's never a day that's going to come where we can say, done. Because we're going to be learning more things, and it ends up, just not being possible. But I would argue that right now, today, there's no reason why people can't be using green chemistry in whatever aspect of their job description or humanity that they are. If they're purchasing, if they're designing, if they're inventing, if they're sourcing, if they're installing, if they're using, if whatever, understanding how to seek products that are consistent or attempting to be consistent with the principles of green chemistry, that should be done right now. We shouldn't be sitting waiting for more to develop. Sometimes you're going to find that there's an absence of a preferable solution. But that needs to be shouted from the rooftops so that the inventors know what to be inventing.
Well, it's funny because people think I'm joking when they'll ask me the question, well, how did you come up with this term green chemistry? There's a lot of things that are green now, but back in the day, not so much. And so, I'd say green conjures up images of the environment, but in the US, green is also the color of our money. And so how do you meet your environmental and health goals and your economic goals simultaneously? How do you get alignment on those things? And so you have this concept of green chemistry, and start saying, you'll see people, nodding wisely and saying, yes, but there's no such thing as green chemistry. It's all greener chemistry. And you say, no kidding. So we set out green chemistry as the goal of perfection, knowing that perfection can never be attained, but it always guarantees continuous improvement toward that goal, just like John was saying.
So on that note, for folks that are maybe a little more interested in green chemistry, to your point that anybody can ask the right questions and that it really is a collaborative effort, where should folks go to learn more, and how can they start to get more involved in green chemistry?
They should go to Beyond Benign, which is a not-for-profit that is right up outside of Boston. The Warner Babcock Institute, I have to say that I think the world of it. We do a few nice things down at the Yale Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering, but now that I'm done with those plugs, the nice part of it is this is not 20 plus years ago. This is 2018. There's a worldwide community of people. They're in companies, there's champions who are leading for green chemistry. There are university programs, there are online training, there are, as I mentioned, scientific journals. There are so many resources.
Twitter groups, LinkedIn groups, that people post questions. Hey, does anybody know if there's a better way of doing this, that, or the other thing? Yeah.
So the nice thing is that there is There is now a wonderful tapestry of green chemistry resources from K through 12 to professional training, no matter what sector you're in. Sure, there are lots of courses for chemists, but that's not where it ends. If you think, I know I'm beating on this because I think it's so important. Green chemistry is not for chemists alone. It's as long as we say that chemistry touches every aspect of our lives, every aspect of our society, every aspect of our economy, then this is something that all of us have a vested interest in and can and must contribute to.
Final thought, what do you want folks to take away? What's the one thing you want folks to remember?
That green chemistry is here, green chemistry is now, green chemistry needs to be demanded, and green chemistry needs to be empowered. There is no way to pursue green building, there's no way to pursue sustainability in the absence of green chemistry. That is different from saying that green chemistry is everything. No, there's many aspects that also need to accompany it. I'm just saying, in the absence of it, I don't see a path.
Then the way I look at it is that there are many programs, concepts, philosophies, measuring systems, and sustainability. I look at them all as static snapshots of what we're doing today. So if you imagine hypothetically we have a product and we take all the measuring, all the metrics that you can imagine and take a snapshot of it and say, this is it today. It has this negative impact, it has this negative impact, it has this negative. Now, close your eyes, imagine that we've invented a better technology in which each of those aspects have been improved. The verb that takes it from here to here is green chemistry. So green chemistry isn't a description of what today is. Green chemistry is the action of making tomorrow better.
Outstanding. So let's turn to questions from the audience. And I think we've got a mic, actually. You can call it to the mic. We'll be able to hear your question.
And we won't be able to see you. These lights are completely blinding, and so there's nobody out there. Yeah.
Thank both of you. You've been inspiring to me throughout my career. So what role, if any, can policymakers play in advancing green chemistry?
I'm a big believer in that there are ways to incentivize and empower innovation. That is, and I use those words, incentivize and empower, and enable and create the environment for innovation, rather than somehow try to legally mandate innovation. You know, the thou shalt innovate model, I'm not a big fan of. So, for instance, is it necessary to allow for the fundamental research to move forward, and is that crucial? Yes, that is crucial. So then there should be resources for that. Do there need to be investment mechanisms for those technologies that need to be developed and go through that difficult time where investment is most difficult? Yes, that's a public policy decision as well. Are there other levers, policy levers, such as providing patent life extension for those types of products where patent is the coin of the realm, is what's valued? Yes, there is. So I think there's a variety of interventions that policy can help to incentivize and move forward.
And I'll just amplify that. And most scientists, most people in technology see policy as something that has nothing to do with their lives. And yet, if you see how R&D happens, nationally and globally, some government agency, the NSF, the NIH, the DOE, the DOD, whatever, is putting out money to pay for R&D. Those decisions of what that money is funding is a product of policy. And so the politicians that we vote for and we put into office who are negotiating and discussing the shape of those policies are intimately related to what is being invented. Nanotech, back 12 years ago, 15 years ago, was an obscure thing. The US federal government allocated billions of dollars to nanotech. So every university now has a nano center, there's nano this, there's nano that. Scientists didn't do that because they loved it as much as they did it because there was funding for it. And so if we could pull together the resources to enable funding of green chemistry technologies, what better use of public money?
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for this session. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Paul and John. This has been an incredible session. I think we had some excellent discussion, and I hope that folks understand a little bit more the power of green chemistry and really how it can help us transform to the sustainable place we want to get to. So thank you all. Let's thank our speakers.
Thank you very much.